السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, brothers and sisters, we are very fortunate and blessed to have with us our esteemed speaker and our Shaykh and our mentor, and on a personal note, inshallah, friend of mine. I hope, inshallah, the feeling is mutual, Shaykhana, our dear Shaykh Dr. Hatem Al-Hajj. And of course, Dr. Hatem does not need an introduction, but still, it is our fard and our duty, ikraman lahu, just a brief summary that our Shaykh Hatem is one of the very few people who has combined between an MD, a professional doctorate, being a full doctor, and then, of course, a PhD in Islamic studies as well, the real doctor. I always joke that my mother introduces me, and when somebody says doctor, she goes, "This is not the real doctor, asli doctor, no, not an asli one." So the Dr. Hatem is asli doctor, right? And he is also PhD in Fiqh al-Muqaran, in comparative fiqh. So welcome, Shaykh al-Karim, to our extensive podcast today.
Allah barik fiik, Shaykh Yasir. Jazakallah khairan for the invitation.
Alhamdulillah. And of course, Shaykh Hatem is, of course, very involved in the American Muslim Jurist Association, AMJA, and well known, his classes, his durus, his publications, his fiqh. Now, I want to explain why we are doing this podcast, which is, of course, something relatively new, and it is our first, inshallah, and perhaps in a longer series. And that is that, especially during the last few years, post-Arab Spring, there were a lot of debates going on online with regards to Islam, Islamic politics, the role of the ulama, and these were very contested issues, and emotions were high, and sentiments were given in a very blunt manner. And I began to read, of course, I had my views, and that back then I was active on social media. So I began to read Shaykh Hatem's posts, and they really resonated with me, because these are things that I had been saying as well in my own way. But of course, Shaykh Hatem is, of course, far senior to us in every single aspect. And so he was saying in a far more academic and with the quotations that are necessary. And I began to have a conversation with him. And I said, Shaykhana, we need to have a very frank dialogue. And even if we disagree, we show what are the parameters of disagreement and explain, because these are very sensitive issues. And so because of those posts, and this is like we're talking about, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, this is finally the result of that after a number of back and forths. Finally, alhamdulillah, he's here in Dallas with us. And so we're going to be spending a few hours, inshallah ta'ala, as long as we're able to discuss a series of sensitive topics with regards to Islam and politics, with regards to Khilafa, with regards to methodology of Khilafa, with regards to the importance of Khilafa. And a very important note, this interview, or this back and forth, because we're both going to be participating, it just so happened coincidentally, I gave a talk last month before Ramadan that is separate to what we're talking about with Shaykh Hatem, even though, of course, because I gave it, I'm going to bring up certain aspects of that. But the reason why we're having this podcast has nothing to do with my talk last month, because I have been speaking with him for many months, in fact, more than a year, to get this podcast done, inshallah. So with that, Shaykh al-Karim, let us begin with, I would say, the crux of the matter. And then from that, we're going to keep on going our way organically. And again, for the record, our brothers and sisters, this is not scripted. I have some questions and some talking points that I have in my mind, but we haven't, scripted this. We're going to be, inshallah, raw and organic. And I will be pushing back and forth, inshallah, as is our want. So the first question, Shaykh al-Karim, is what is your personal view, based on your understanding of the Quran, the Sunnah, the Seerah, of the obligation of establishing the Khilafah? Is it something that is fard? And if so, the level of fard? And where do we get this fard from? Is it something that is aqdi? It is something from the sharia? Is it something aqli? So what is the role of the Khilafah in our discourse as Muslims? So, Bismillah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd. To proceed. Well, once again, jazakallah khair for the invitation, and it's a very appropriate question to start this discussion with. But before I address that particular question, I just want to say that I wish that the viewers would examine the arguments based on their own merits, and do not waste too much time trying to find like a small box for the speakers or trying to categorize the speakers. because personally speaking, it would be hard for them to find a small box for me. That does not mean that I don't have any rails. I do have my own religious theological orientations and so on, and I do have my own boundaries. But it would be a waste of time for the viewers to try to find a small box to put the speaker or that speaker in, and basically not examine the arguments on their own merits. Having said that, I must say that growing up, I had many ideas that I don't consider to be founded anymore or realistic anymore. And I don't say this to basically undermine those ideas or to belittle those ideas, because it is very possible that I was right then and wrong now. Very possible. I hope it is not the case, but it is very possible. I just want to say this to get across to the viewers that I do not hate any genuine, sincere Muslim for having unrealistic or unfounded ideas. I have grown as I aged less respectful of identitarian religiosity and sort of fake religiosity, but any genuine, sincere Muslim, I don't really dislike them just because they have unfounded or unrealistic ideas, because I believe that I myself, growing up, had some unfounded and unrealistic ideas, and I believe I was sincere. So that's where I'm coming from. I know that sincere people can have bad ideas. So I don't hate any.
Exhibit A, Sheikh. I hope one phrases myself. So yes, we know. Yes.
So that's important to start with. Having said that, I think that we should delineate what it is exactly that we're talking about. We're not talking about the Khilafa in the sense, because things get conflated by people who have ideological fixations and things of that nature. So we're not talking about loyalty to Muslims, wala lil Muslimin. We're not talking about the broader concept of unity. We're not talking about the broader concept of this ummah being one ummah, like the collective singular faith or religious community. We are a collective singular religious community. We are one ummah in the broader sense. We have loyalty and allegiance to the believers. There is no question about this. We're not talking about order versus anarchy. We're not talking about the concept of imama as in having order versus anarchy. We're not talking about the shariah and the implementation of the shariah. We're talking about a particular point, which is the obligation of having a singular global political leadership for the entire Muslim community, or a centralized government for the entire Muslim community, as some people imagine that we can have a central government in Baghdad that would rule over all Muslim nations or Muslim communities from Casablanca to Jakarta. That concept is what we want to discuss. We want to discuss, whether it is founded, whether it is desirable, whether it is feasible. But the other concepts, loyalty to the believers, the unity of this ummah, the obligation of cooperation, coordination, integration in various aspects, the importance of order versus anarchy, the importance of the Sharia as the backbone, the central pillar around which we organize as Muslims. All of these concepts are not basically up for debate. There's no controversy there, and it's inconceivable that there would be any controversy there. Now, the Khilafa, someone may say, is the political expression of that unity, or the Khilafa is the actualization of that unity in the political sphere. Someone may say this, and they would be justified to say this. And it would be justified to say that it would be desirable. Like, if it is feasible, then it would be desirable to have a singular global leadership for Muslims, because it would be basically the actualization of that unity that we talk about, that one ummah that we talk about in the political sphere. So I think that, this may be an end goal, or of course our ultimate end goal is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for every Muslim. And we should not lose sight of this. This is the ultimate end goal for Muslims, the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Khilafa, as Shaykh Abu al-Hasan Nadwi, rahimahullah, in his amazing and genius writings, particularly his book, Tafsir al-Siyasi al-Islam, or the political interpretation of Islam, pointed out, would be a fruit, a result of our ubudiyya lillah, of our basically commitment, our religious commitment, our commitment to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our devotion to Allah. It will bring about righteous governance, and it will bring about unity, and it will bring about that political manifestation or actualization, like rain brings about vegetations. So it is a result. It's not the ultimate end goal, and it is not the effective cause. It is not a necessary or sufficient cause for renaissance, for Islamic life. It's neither a necessary nor sufficient cause to have an Islamic life, but it is a product, a result of having an Islamic life.
Jayyid. So, Sheikh, in this case, the technical term would be, it is fard or mustahab for you?
Fard or mustahab?
I'm asking.
Okay. It would be, what is it exactly that is fard? Establishing an imam in different areas is, of course, a fard. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man mata wa laysa fi unuqihi bay'a mata mitatan jahiliyya." Whoever dies without having pledged an allegiance to an imam, he will die in a state of jahiliyya, which means that you should not basically be promoting anarchy or rebelling against the legitimate authority, or Muslims should not ignore the importance of order, and hierarchy, political hierarchy. Now, is it a must to have a singular global leadership for Muslims? I think that it is a fard to work towards unity and to actualize of that unity whatever it is that can be actualized given the socio-political realities of the different times. Let me be clear with you here. I would not have any faith crisis if we never had a Khilafa until the Day of Judgment. It would not cause me any faith crisis. It would not cause me any discomfort about my faith. There is a particular hadith that people quote often. I grew up quoting this hadith. I grew up believing in this wholeheartedly. The known hadith is reported by Ahmad from Nu'man ibn Bashir, in which Hudhayfa conveyed from the Prophet ﷺ that he said, تكون فيكم النبوة ما شاء الله أن تكون ثم يرفعه الله إليه ثم تكون فيكم خلافة على منهج النبوة ما شاء الله أن تكون ثم يرفعه الله إليه. So the Prophet ﷺ said that you will have the prophethood among you for as long as Allah wills, and Allah will then raise it or remove it when He wills. And then there will be a khilafah on the prophetic method for as long as Allah wills, and then Allah will raise it when He wills, and then there will be kingship, a reign of oppressive kingship for as long as Allah wills, and Allah will raise it, and then there will be a reign of compulsive kingship, mulk al-adud or al-ad, and then al-mulk al-jabri. And then there will be Khilafa ala minhaj al-nubuwwah. Then there will be a Khilafa on the prophetic method. On the prophetic method. We were certain, and that is basically the problem of lack of knowledge. We were certain that this meant that we are waiting for a Khilafa on the prophetic method. Growing up, I was like, when I was 17, I had given my first Jum'ah when I was 17, and it was about al-Hakimiyya.
No way, that was your first Jum'ah.
Yes, that was, like overconfidence that I have regretted afterwards. But anyway, so I was certain that we were expecting this. And it would have caused me faith crisis then to have been told that no, this may never materialize. A singular global leadership, political leadership for all Muslims may never materialize. Because this hadith meant to me, and other end times hadith or traditions meant to me that this is what we're waiting for. And we were also certain that al-Mahdi would not be the first Khalifa. Sometimes we thought that it may be. Sometimes we thought, then we came to learn that no, it's likely not going. He's not going to be the first Khalifa. And our understanding of the end of times traditions also was pretty strict and to a great deal literalist. And I am a scripturalist, so some people that would be unkind to me would say literalist, but I believe I'm a scripturalist. So I don't belittle the importance of those reports, but I have like a little bit more flexible understanding of them. That is not saying metaphorical, but I am someone who subscribes to contextual language theory. And I have a little bit more flexible understanding of those reports. Now, this particular hadith, this is how I would look at this particular hadith that would be basically presented to Muslim youth to tell them that you must believe in this as you believe in, Allah being stawa ala al-arsh, for instance. Above his throne, or you must believe in this as you believe in the day of judgment being true, and in the angels and all of that stuff. I don't believe so anymore for several reasons. One of them, to begin with, being a scripturalist, I believe in what Imam Shatibi rahimahullah said, that رتبة السنة التأخر عن الكتاب في الاعتبار, which means that the rank of the Sunnah is subsequent to the Quran, is not equal to the Quran, it's subsequent to the Quran in consideration. لأن السنة مظنونة قطع مع القرآن. Sunnah is speculative, mostly speculative, and certainty is with the Quran, not the Sunnah.
And this is قول الجمهور. It's nothing. It's not just Shatibi. This is the default of the usul.
Yes, this is. But certainty is not with the Sunnah. Shatibi himself says that certainty applies to the Sunnah, to the collective body of the Sunnah, not individual ahadith. Not individual ahadith. So you may say that you belong to a Hanbali tradition, and I do. It does not mean at all that we don't have basically the concept of textual critique, or the concept of critiquing the matn of the ahadith, not only the isnad. So we recognize that the isnad needs to be critiqued, but the matn also needs to be critiqued. There is a particular book by Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah called Al-Manar al-Munif fi al-Sahih wal-Da'if, which would translate to the lofty lighthouse concerning the authentic and the weak, in which he says that there is a report from the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, إذا عطس الرجل وهو في حديثه فهو دليل صدقه أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Yeah.
So when a man sneezes while in conversation, it's a sign on his truthfulness. So Imam al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, despite the fact that some have authenticated the chain of narration, the observable reality contradicts the hadith. The observable reality contradicts the hadith. Al-hiss يكذبه.
It's a very sensitive topic, Shaykh, and of course this quotation it causes consternation amongst many who don't even know this is from our own usul. Many even Salafis or Ahl al-Hadith, the notion of using aql and common sense to look at an isnad. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions this for multiple examples, and this is not the only one, that
yes.
when something is observably, patently false, right? Then if you find some solitary chain that even if some people might think that the chain is authentic, observed reality is going to be more important than a dhanni chain, right? And this is something that, again, I also brought up a number of my lectures with regards to especially eschatology, because this is another issue I wanted to mention, and that is, it's understandable that, especially at a young age, we all went through that, eschatology and science of the Day of Judgment, they occupy or preoccupy a type of obsession that actually perhaps even is not as useful as other sciences and disciplines. And we've all been through that phase here. So this hadith you mentioned then, Sheikh, are you saying that it is A, not authentic, or B, misunderstood, or C, both?
No, I am saying that if it is authentic, and many scholars authenticated it, and that's fine. It could be authentic, but it's still a singular report, which means that it does not confer certainty. If it is authentic, and I am someone who says that you should not be going around critiquing the matn of the hadith if you're not qualified. Of course, this would be chaos. And individual Muslims should not be going around critiquing this hadith, critiquing that hadith, because they're unable to comprehend it. Because now you will make your aqli, your hawa, your passions, your desires, your biases, the ultimate judge. And that is not what Islam is about. But qualified scholars have critiqued the matn as they critiqued the isnad, or the chain of narration of the hadith. And singular reports do not confer certainty. So it would not cause me a faith crisis if it did not materialize. But once again, I would go back and say, what is the meaning of this hadith? The idea of eschatology, end times, a hadith, you have to have a flexible understanding. You should get the moral lesson from the hadith, but how they materialize, unfold in the future, you should not have a rigid understanding of this. We paid a very hefty price during the Mongol conquest, for instance. People thought that these are Ya'juj and Ma'juj, and people were defeated before they even confronted them. Because So this hadith, Habib ibn Salim, one of the narrators, then the person who narrated from Nu'man ibn Bashir, said that Habib ibn Salim, he's a narrator, and you know that we privilege the understanding of narrators. Yeah. Okay. Habib ibn Salim thought that this Khilafa ala Minhaj al-Nubuwwah happened already during the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Yeah. And he actually communicated this through Yazid ibn Nu'man to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz sort of were happy to hear it. Yeah. Did not contest this interpretation, were happy to hear it. It gave him bushra to hear this. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz also agreed with this understanding of Habib ibn Salim, that it actually did materialize, already happened. So now you're waiting for it, and the narrator of the hadith thinks that it already happened.
Exactly.
So that once again, that basically underscores the importance of a flexible understanding of these traditions.
And by the way, this is as you know, Shaykh, this is a common theme in eschatological reports, that every generation pretty much thinks that what is happening in their time is exactly what is predicted in the traditions. This is a routine cycle every single time we see it. And the same thing is happening now as well, where our, shabab, they read these ahadith and once again, they're like, okay, well, it's as if they're trying to write the script or trying to understand it directly in our times. And this is something that our ulama have warned against. Don't write scripts or imagine those traditions to be applying to your time until there is certainty in this regard. But Shaykhana, pushing back a little bit, and again, this is for the viewers, because obviously at many levels I'm sympathetic, but I wanted to quote you quotations that are well known in our tradition, and I will quote very quickly, but it needs to be quoted because these are quotations always found in these discourses online. So for example, the Nawawi says, وأجمعوا على أنه يجب على المسلمين نصب خليفة ووجوبه بالشرع لا بالعقل, that there is ijma' that the Muslims have to elect or put up a leader. And of course Qurtubi says in his tafsir, ولا خلاف في وجوب ذلك بين الأمة ولا بين الأئمة إلا ما روي عن الأصم وهو عن الشريعة أصم, that there is no difference of opinion given in the entire ummah except for the Mu'tazili al-Asam. And then he made a pun because al-Asam means the one that is deaf, and so he said he was deaf or mute from the sharia. So there is no khilaf that there must be an imama and a khilafa that is established. And Ibn Taymiyyah says in the Siyasa Shar'iyya, his famous book, that يجب أن يعرف أن ولاية أمر الناس من أعظم واجبات الدين بل لا قيام للدين إلا بها فإن بني آدم لا تتم مصلحتهم إلا بالاجتماع لحاجة بعضهم إلى بعض ولا بد لهم عند الاجتماع من رأس حتى قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا خرج ثلاثة في سفر فليؤمر أحدهم. And then he goes on and on. This translates as, it must be known that the wilaya, that the leadership for the affairs of the Muslims is of the greatest of wajibat of this religion. Rather, the religion cannot be established except through it. And that is because the masalih or the necessary requirements of good of the children of Adam will never take place unless they come together and help one another. And when they do so, there must be a leader amongst them. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, if three people go on a traveling, then one of them should be in charge. And let me quote one or two more, because again, these are the quotations that are given. Al-Dhahabi says, اتفق أهل السنة والمعتزلة والمرجئة والخوارج والشيعة على وجوب الإمامة وأن الأمة فرض عليها الانقياد إلى إمام عادل. That Ahl Sunnah and the Mu'tazila and the Murji and the Khawarij and the Shia, all of them have agreed that it is wajib to have an imam, and that it is obligatory upon the ummah to then submit to a just imam. And then of course you have al-Mawardi, and I'll finish here, and I have other quotes. I have a whole bunch of quotations because again, this is the whole point. Anytime you start about this, you're immediately bombarded with these quotations. So let us discuss them. Al-Mawardi, of course, is one of the few people who has written a treatise on Islamic political science. We wish more had been written, but as you're aware, this is a topic that is not elaborated on, and we can maybe discuss this later on in this podcast. Al-Mawardi says in Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, الإمامة موضوعة لخلافة النبوة في حراسة الدين وسياسة الدنيا وعقدها لمن يقوم بها في الأمة واجب بالإجماع. That the imama is a basic continuation, I'm translating by meaning, of the Khilafa that the Prophet ﷺ established, and it is a protection of the deen, and it is the politics of this world. It is how we run this world. And to establish it, for those who are going to be sufficient for it, it is wajib for this ummah by ijma' of the scholars. Now I can go on and on. As you're aware, there's so many quotations. So one could say your sentiment at the beginning 5 minutes ago seems to clash with all of these quotations. What would you respond to this?
It doesn't. It may appear so, but it does not. I said in the beginning that we have to separate between imamat or imama as in order versus anarchy versus having one imam for the entire ummah. These are two different discussions. So Imam al-Juwayni rahimahullah in his book al-Irshad points out that difference, that one is min al-qawata and one is not min al-qawata. One is a certainty, which is the importance of installing an imam or appointing an imam, basically to defend the weak, to protect the borders, to establish law and order. There is no question about this whatsoever. This is min al-qawata. Now, plurality of imams, multiplicity of imams versus singularity, that is a different discussion. Realistically speaking, we have one imam for a very short period of time, and thereafter we have not been all under one imam for the vast majority of our history. But theologically speaking, speaking from the fiqh viewpoint, the first one is a matter of consensus. The second one, can we have several imams, several khalifas, if you use the word khalifa in its linguistic sense, which appears to be how the Sahaba viewed it. Umar ibn Khattab himself said, if you say Khalifat Rasulullah, yatul. And then Al-Mughira said to him, نحن المؤمنون وأنت أميرنا فأنت أمير المؤمنين. He said, okay, that works. So Umar ibn Khattab said, if you say the successor of the messenger of Allah, Abu Bakr was the successor of the messenger. If you say the successor of the messenger of Allah, this will be long. Then Mughira ibn Shu'bah said to him, and in other reports to others, that we are the believers, you are our leader or prince, Amir, so you are the leader of the believers. You are Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Umar said that works. Okay, so they understood the word Khalifa, and Khalifa did actually appear in different traditions, prophetic traditions, that we can talk about later. But they seem to have had like a more flexible understanding of the word Khalifa as someone who succeeds another. Ukhlufni fi qawmi. Replace me, take my place among my people. Musa said to Harun, "Ukhlufni fi qawmi wa aslih, wa la tattaba' sabil al-mufsidin." So take my place in my people. You're someone who's left behind to take care of someone's affairs. Someone who succeeds another to take care of the affairs of that person or their family or their ummah, etc. So plurality of imams is a little bit controversial. And as I said, Imam al-Juwayni said it's not min al-qawata. Al-Imam Abu al-Abbas ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah critiqued the ijma' that Imam ibn Hazm rahimahullah reported about the singularity of or the wujub of having a singular or the obligation of having one imam for the entire ummah. And Imam ibn Taymiyyah did not contest that it is wajib, because he himself, recognizing that sometimes it is unfeasible, but he says that the sunnah is to have a single imam. But if it happens that because of ma'asiyah or a sin from part of the ummah, an incapacity of the other part, that we have more than one imam, and this already happened from the time of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, when he basically broke off with Andalusia. We have not been under a single imam from that time. So it already happened. It's not like we are the ones who are making this ma'asiyah. It had already happened. There were like more than before this. During the time of Ali radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah, Al-Karramiyya said they were both imams at the same time. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he had Abdullah ibn Zubayr had the majority of the Muslim lands under him during the Umayyad dynasty. He had Al-Iraq, he had Al-Hijaz, Al-Haramain, he had Egypt also for some time. And so the Umayyads had, the greater Syria or Sham or the Levant, and then the parts to the north of this, but they have very little compared to Abdullah ibn Zubayr. So it's not like a new thing. This ma'asiyah, as Imam Taymiyyah says, it's a ma'asiyah, had already happened. He then says, if that is the case, then each one of those imams, recognizing the legitimacy of this arrangement, each one of those imams should fulfill the rights of people, establish the hudud, establish the law, and fulfill people's rights and protect people and so on and so forth. So he's basically, this is a shift of focus, and this is an important shift of focus, and this is the only way we can survive. From the Khilafah to the Sharia, where the Sharia becomes the central pillar around which we organize the formative thesis for Islamic life, the central pillar around which Muslims organize, not the Khilafah. The Sharia is bigger than the Khilafah. The Khilafah is one manifestation of the unity, one goal that we must be working for as an end goal that will motivate, energize us, that will cause progress. You see how Erdogan said that, we want to join the EU, we want to join the EU just to bring about progress within Turkey towards like this ideal, even though, or towards this objective, even though he may have never believed in it, But this is not the same thing. Not the same thing. Khilafah is not like joining the EU. I'm not saying this, it's the same thing, but you have an end goal that will motivate and energize people and that will bring about progress towards unity. It is important. Economic integration between Muslims, mutual sort of cooperation on various issues. The defense also, defense treaties, mutual defense, all of that. The Khilafah will basically be the catalyst of all of those manifestations of unity, cooperation, and coordination between Muslims. Now, having more than one imam has been the position of some scholars. We have three different positions here. We have those scholars who said, without any reason, you can have more than one imam. Al-Karramiyya said this. And certainly you may blame me, but these are still Muslim.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Karramiyya are Sunnis, they're not just Muslims. They're Aqeedah-wise, they're within Sunnism by and large.
Yeah.
Generic Sunnism.
Yes. So Al-Karramiyya said this. They had their own excesses, but yes, they are within the Sunni fold, but they had their own excesses. So Zaydiyya said this. Some of the Zaydiyya said this. Some of the Mu'tazila said this. Without any reason, you can have more than one imam. Some people said that you can have more than one imam if it is logistically difficult to have one. Those are the people who said that you can have more than one imam إذا اتسعت الخطة, means the lands of Islam became too vast for one imam to control, too far away from each other, too vast for one imam to control. إذا اتسعت الخطة, you can have more than one imam. And those are not a few people or basically negligible. Imam al-Juwayni reports this from Imam Abil Hasan al-Ash'ari and al-Isfrayini. This was also the position of al-Qurtubi and al-Baghdadi. This was also the position of many of the Mu'tazila. This was also the position of, I would argue that this is what Imam Ibn Taymiyyah is indicating when he says that if at some point for a ma'asiyah or a sin committed by people we split up or we became divided and because of the incapacity of others, then having more than one imam is a legitimate arrangement, a legitimate alternative. So you have those three different positions. Now, am I denying that the vast majority of Muslim scholars said that having more than one imam is not acceptable, that the obligation is to have a singular political entity for all Muslims? I am not denying this. This is the majority. This is the decisive majority. Decisive majority of our Muslim scholars said, regardless of the vastness of the Muslim lands, regardless of logistical difficulties, it is obligatory to install one imam for all Muslims. Now, is this a matter of certainty? No, it's not a matter of certainty. That is what I want to go back to. This is the majority position. But more and more people starting to become more sort of accepting of the reality of the diversity of communities and the difficulty of installing one imam that would rule over all Muslims throughout the land.
Let me just push back a little bit here. How do I say this gently so that actually
Imam Shawkani did Imam Shawkani not say that people who argue about this, the multiplicity of imams, the legitimacy of this alternative of multiple imams should not be argued with or should not be presented with evidence because they don't comprehend it.
Yeah, Imam Shawkani in Sayl al-Jarrar has a very pragmatic and actually very open-minded reality that this is you're going to have different imams in different places and everybody should be following the imam of their place here. But Shaykh, my point here, and I'm trying to be gentle because I have to be conscious of how words are easily misconstrued online. Don't you find that this discussion of the quantity of imams and how they should be seems to be disconnected from the historical reality of the ummah, meaning that all of this discussion is happening almost munfasil tamaman, almost as if it is happening in a vacuum with regards to even in the same time frame as those authors are writing. Because even the Abbasid and the Uthmani and whatnot Khilafas, the majority of their own domains were just by name even. There was complete separate systems of government, taxation, sometimes even not even a nominal nod towards the Khilafah. And you've always had many hierarchical dynasties within all of these after the time of the Umayyads. And then you've actually had complete disconnect, like between the Mughals and the Ottomans, for example, right? There's a complete disconnect between the two of them. And there's a nod here and there, but the Mughal emperor never submitted to the Ottoman Sultan. And so this whole notion of how many imams should there be and whatnot seems to be disconnected from the waqi' reality that since the time of the second century, i.e. 100-something Hijrah, we have always had competing imams and competing dynasties and competing provinces that were, for all practical purposes and sometimes officially, completely disconnected from one leadership. What do you say to that?
I agree completely, wholeheartedly. How could you contest to this? I mean, it's just like you would be lying. And like so, ideologues lie about the history all the time to live their own fantasies. So I agree with this. And it's just like indisputable reality. And as I said, this even before this, from the time of Ali radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, some people consider that they were both imams at the same time. Abdullah ibn Zubayr was an imam at the same time as Yazid and Muawiyah, his son, and then Marwan, and then Abdul Malik, and so on. And he was the better imam, in all honesty. I mean, he was Abdullah ibn Zubayr. How could you compare Abdullah ibn Zubayr?
Without a doubt, he was the better of the two at the time.
Yeah. So the idea that yes, this is a reality that has always existed. Now, this did not change their theory about the singularity. But where does the theory come from? Here is the important part here is the theological foundation of this theory, the theological foundation or the legal justification of this theory. So they report the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma', like usual. There is not a single explicit ayah in the Quran or close to explicit or even apparent a verse in the Quran that demands a singular political entity for all Muslims. So what is it that you can come up with? إن هذه أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاعبدون. This nation of yours is
Well,
one
they
nation.
say أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا أولي الأمر منكم. They bring their evidence.
So so this nation of yours is one nation, and I'm your Lord, so worship me alone. This was basically addressing the line of prophets and messengers
multiple
from
civilizations.
before.
Yeah.
And then even if you say it applies to Muslims, it applies to our collective, singular faith community.
Yes, it's not a political thing,
in the religious sense, not in the political sense.
Okay.
And then أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم.
There's no evidence. It is
أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم.
Yeah.
Obey Allah and His Messenger and those in authority among you. It was actually in plural form.
Exactly. Use it against it. But Sheikh, okay, let me take.
So now we take the Sunnah. Now we take the Sunnah. إذا بويع لخليفتين فاقتلوا الآخر منهما.
Yeah.
من بايع إماما فأعطاه صفقة يده وثمرة قلبه فليطاعه ما استطاع فإذا جاء آخر ينازعه فاضربوا عنق الآخر. So إذا بويع لخليفتين فاقتلوا الآخر منهما. If the bay'ah is given to two khalifas, kill the latter. Whoever gives the pledge of allegiance to an imam, then he should obey him as much as he can. And if another one comes to dispute him or to overthrow him, then kill the other. Kill the other. Okay. Now, here is the issue. Is the Prophet ﷺ talking to Muslims? This is just like the global moon sighting and the local moon sighting. Is he talking to Muslims in different localities that you should not have more than one imam within the same dominion or the same territory? That's a possible interpretation. That is accepted authenticity of those reports, and we accept them. Isn't it a possible interpretation that the Prophet ﷺ was talking to different Muslim communities in different places, saying that you must not have two imams at the same time within the same dominion, within the same territory? It's a possible interpretation.
It is.
So there is no certainty here that the Prophet ﷺ is saying, and then the ijma' is reported. The ijma' is reported. But didn't the Ansar say, minna amir wa minkum amir? When the Ansar convened at Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, or the shed of Bani Sa'ida, or the portico of Bani Sa'ida, whatever you call it, did they not say, there we'll appoint an amir from our side? They said to the Muhajirin, if this matter is of such importance, I just want people to reflect on this.
By the way, the arguments that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh gave back were aqli and mantiqi and not shari'i. He didn't quote a hadith.
Yeah.
He used an aqli argument to say you can't have two amirs.
It's not gonna.
And this is an important point as well. But anyway,
the whole discussion in Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, people need to just reflect on
it. It's a very
discussion.
deep. I don't want to go there, but it's a very deep, even theological issues. But that's not for today's podcast.
So minna amir wa minkum amir. If this matter, if al-hukuma al-ilahiyya, the governance of God, is the crux of ubudiyya, is basically the most important manifestation, the ultimate goal of ubudiyya, which is what Shaykh Abu al-Hasan Nadwi critiques in his Tafsir al-Siyasi lil-Islam, the political interpretation of Islam. Would the Sahaba be so unaware of this matter and the details, the finest details of this matter? Would the Ansar be unaware, to this extent? Would they have this much disagreement among themselves?
The pushback, Sheikh, from their side, and again, this is a discussion, obviously I'm sympathetic to your stance here. The pushback from their side is that you are neglecting the fact that the Sahaba understood that this was so important that they delayed the burial of the Prophet ﷺ, or even if you don't say delay it, they didn't even wait for his burial until they had elected an emir. So for them, having an khalifa and having an Islamic political entity was so important that even the burial of the Prophet ﷺ did not take precedence over that. So they argue to us, this is ijma' of the Sahaba, that you must actively work towards establishing an Islamic polity.
I completely concur. That's order versus anarchy. That is not singular political entity.
So then this leads us to the other point, which is a very difficult one.
And just keep in mind that there are many ijma'as that have been reported on many issues. Like, look at the ijma', for instance, that the Khalifa has to be Qurashi. Isn't that an ijma'?
Well, no, because Abu Hanifa and others in Mu'tazila, but yeah, some have said there's ijma', yes. Many have said there's ijma'.
Many reported this ijma'.
Even though, as usual, there's no ijma', but khair, yes, there's reported.
But can you neglect Al-Ansar who said that...
Didn't even know it was there. Exactly my point. This incident has a lot of deep...
Can you also neglect Umar radiallahu anhu, who said if Abu Ubaidah were alive, I would have not thought about anyone else, and if he were not, and if he was not, then I would have chosen Mu'adh. And in some other hadith, he said Salim Mawla Abi Hudhayfa. Both Mu'adh and Salim Mawla Abi Hudhayfa are not from Quraysh.
They're not even...
So even Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, Imam ibn Hajar rahimahullah, says that people who reported this ijma', they need to figure out how to reinterpret this statement. They can either say it's muhtamal, to say that Umar changed his mind later, or that the ijma' happened after Umar. And anyone who knows about this knows that the difficulty of having an ijma' after Umar.
Yes.
The difficulty of establishing an ijma' after Umar. So you have Ansar, unaware of this sort of indubitable fact of the Aqeedah of the Muslimin.
Clearly developed afterwards, but
and then Umar also unaware that it's just this is not. This is just not logical.
Jayyid. So then, Sheikh, let me then be very explicit, because you're, in my humble opinion, you seem to be skirting around a very awkward reality, and I want to verbalize it. And so let's deconstruct this reality. You seem to be very clearly insinuating that these hadith, or let me just say the concept of imara and khilafa and leadership and whatnot, that as long as there is civil order, and as long as anarchy is eliminated, that to a great extent, the spirit of what the Sharia wants us to do has been accomplished. And therefore, it seems to me that since we are living in lands where, at least many lands, not all of them, many lands where anarchy does not exist, there's not complete lawlessness and chaos. There is civil order. There is a means of people cooperating together for the greater good. It seems that the existence of these systems mitigates, in your eyes, this notion that other Islamist movements have of working towards what they call a Khilafa. Am I correct in this verbalization?
So as I said, I believe that it's an obligation on us to work towards the Khilafa as an end goal, basically work towards Muslim unity, or the political expression of that Muslim unity, or actualization of that Muslim unity. But there are many other priorities, and it depends on what we mean by the Khilafah and which strategies we will adopt to achieve that political unity. And I don't believe that we can just have the Khilafah drop down from the heavens on us. Like, we just we can't start by the Khilafah. This notion that we will overthrow the government in Morocco, for instance, and march the troops from Morocco to Jakarta and use, some uprisings here and there to enable us.
By the way, Morocco is just an example. It's just we're not intending any coup, just for the record here. It's just an example, guys.
But this thought, yes, that you overthrow the government in one place, you take over that one country, and then you marshal your troops and bring everybody under that central rule or government is not realistic. It is not realistic. It does not sound feasible. Now, then we have to figure out, yes, working towards Muslim unity is an obligation. Working towards Muslim coordination, cooperation, integration is an obligation. But what do we mean by this, and how do we go about it is the question. And when you bring, what I was trying to say is that certainty belongs to the Islamic values and ideas, not a specific detailed system of governance. But Islam brought about certain values that are extremely important for righteous governance that we should not neglect. I have always said this to myself about what we have done to Islam, what we have done to the Quran. I've been saying to myself, أسكتناه حين نطق وأنطقناه حين سكت, or أسكتناه حيث نطق وأنطقناه حيث سكت. We basically ignored it, silenced it when it spoke, and we made it to speak when it stayed silent. Which means what? There are certain concepts that are very important Islamically for righteous governance. Shura is one of them. And this is not because of liberalism, and this is not because of modernity. This is a surah in the Quran that was named after Shura. 2 verses that spoke explicitly of Shura. وَشَوَرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. Their affairs are conducted on the basis of mutual consultation, and consult them. And a surah that was named after Shura. Adl, justice, is an extremely Islamic value. Equality between equals is an important Islamic value. Separation of powers, Ali radiallahu anhu, and the story of the shield that disputed over the Jewish man and went to the judge. Separation of powers within, the independence of the judiciary or the judicial branch is an important Islamic concept. So there are important some Islamic concepts. Some people argue that Islam provides a system of governance. I don't get entangled in terminology. So if you think that Islam provided a system of governance, so I'm not going to argue with you over the word system. I don't believe that Islam provided details with regard to governance. Islam provided principles, and that is the beauty and the genius of Islam. Because certain things need to be delineated in great detail, such as the salah, because they never change.
And other things are left.
Other changes have
Generic
to
advice.
be adjusted to adapt it to circumstantial realities that are variable, that are changing all the time. So think about the Sharia as having constant objectives and overarching maxims, and then flexible legal framework. The Sharia itself, as Imam Shatibi says, خطاب الله عز وجل, Allah's address to us, is not moving. It is the reality that is moving. So different circumstances will bring about different rulings, not because the Sharia is moving, it is because the reality is moving. The Sharia is fixed, but the Sharia is based on principles and manatat, effective causes. The legal justifications or effective causes, whatever ratio legis, whatever you call it. So those manatat are fixed, those maxims are fixed, the reality is moving. So when the reality changes, this particular custom or this particular matter would fit under a different principle of Sharia. The principles are fixed. So the reality itself is moving like this, under the fixed principles of the Sharia. So the flexible legal framework with the Sharia will accommodate the differences in the different times and different places, as the verifying erudite scholars have over and over stated and emphasized and reiterated. So in this particular area, the area of politics, the sphere of politics, things change all the time. The geopolitical realities, the socio-political realities change all the time. Therefore, having a fixed, detailed system would not be
feasible
appropriate.
even, yeah.
Would
And
not
that's why,
be
yes,
appropriate.
and even
So-
historically, we have seen different iterations of systems.
Of course,
Yes.
like whoever said that al-ahd is part of is recommended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-ahd, which is basically passing the covenant on. So you spoke about Imam al-Mawardi and having a book on siyasa shariah called Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyya. It's a great book, but how much of it is direct revelation from God, and how much of it is the
Pure
conclusions that he had reached and based on his interpretive effort and the realities that he was surrounded by. At the same time, Imam Abu Ya'la, our Hanbali Imam, had written a book called the Ahkam Sultaniyya also.
Which has a lot
Has
of
a lot of
overlap, but let's
similarities.
not go there today.
A lot of similarities.
A bit too many, but yeah.
But that's fine. But at any rate, is it a product? Is it basically the explicit revelation? No, absolutely not. Like read it impartially. See how many ayat and hadith are being quoted there. See how explicit the implication of the ayat and hadith that are being quoted there. So when Imam Abu Ya'la says that there are 3 different ways of having legitimate leadership or installing an imam, one of them is mutual consultation or the aqd, the idea of the aqd, the contract. This should be the only one. This is the only one that is based on Islamic values. Al-aqd, a contract. We, the people, the Muslims, are الطرف الأصيل في هذا العقد. We are basically the sort of one party in this aqd. We may have like an agent to represent us. Those are Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, those who bind and unbind, but their role is wakil. They are our agent in choosing an imam, but we are basically the people entitled to this right. We, the Muslims, are the people entitled to this right. And if there is a group of people called Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, they are our wakil, our agent, in signing this contract. In signing this contract with the imam. It's a contract. And all basically the conditions of contracts would apply to it. And we can basically modify the contract. We can adjust the contract. We can adapt the contract. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim, illa shartan harram halalan aw ahalla haraman."
We will get to how much we can modify as well later on today. Yeah. Okay.
But what I'm trying to say is
the asl is there. Yeah.
Now Imam Abu Ya'la, rahimahullah, says that it is also established through al-ahd, the covenant that is being passed on. The covenant. What does the covenant mean? Wilayat al-ahd, the concept of wilayat al-ahd, the crown prince, the crown prince. This concept, where does it come from? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu endorsed Umar. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah clearly says that this endorsement is not appointment by Abu Bakr. He did not appoint Umar. He endorsed Umar. Had Umar not been chosen by the majority of the companions, this endorsement would not have meant anything.
Yeah.
Likewise, when Umar gave the bay'ah to Abu Bakr, had Abu Bakr not been given bay'ah to by the majority of the companions, Umar's bay'ah would not have meant anything, in Saqifat Bani Sa'id. So now this wilayat al-ahd or this endorsement had a different interpretation according to later scholars in later times. What is it? It became binding.
Yeah.
So it is not endorsement, it is passing the covenant on to your son or to your brother or to whomever.
And we know this as well. When Muawiyah radiallahu anh instituted it for his son, there was a serious backlash amongst the senior Sahaba and the sons of the Sahaba and Aisha and others, multiple. So it's not that simplistic in this regard.
No, absolutely not. But this became the norm.
Historical norm.
Historically, this became the norm. Where is this? I would say that I appreciate the pragmatism of the fuqaha because they wanted to keep peace and order.
Civil order,
Yeah. I appreciate the pragmatism of the fuqaha. I do not appreciate the rigidity of the people who read those books and consider this to be Islam. So the pragmatism of the fuqaha, the flexibility of the fuqaha, rigid people now read those books and they consider this to be sort of, this is what Islam says. No, this is basically the fuqaha being flexible
for their time frame,
being pragmatic for their times. And that was the norm in their times.
Sheikh, I mean, the other thing that, again, historically, theory is one thing. The reality is that there have been multiple occasions in our history where people have overthrown, people have taken power. I mean, the classic example is Umayyad and Abbasid civil war that took place between the Muslim Ummah, and the Umayyads were massacred and the Abbasids came to power. And then the same thing happened at smaller scales within the Abbasid dynasties multiple times. So obviously we get to the issue of al-mutaghallib here. And what do you have to say about the theory versus the reality of this?
Well, Imam Abu Ya'la himself said that Imam Ahmad indicated that al-mutaghallib would have legitimacy. So when he talked about the three different ways of installing an imam, one of them, as we said, was the contract, al-aqd. The other one is al-ahd, passing the covenant on to the next one. And the third is al-mutaghallib. And Imam Abu Ya'la said that Imam Ahmad indicated, and that became basically the norm in our fiqh tradition. It's not a peculiar position of Imam Ahmad, became the norm in our fiqh tradition that whoever seizes power by force will become an imam, a legitimate imam, and his bay'ah will be binding, and everybody has to accept it. And that became basically the norm for a very big portion of our history. And that resulted in someone being a Kharijite today and being an imam tomorrow. So they are cursed Kharijites today and they're imams tomorrow. And the only difference is they won. That's the only difference. Had they been defeated, they would have been condemned to this Kharijite status for the rest of their lives. But just because they won, they became the legitimate imam that we have to pray for and that we have to basically give him the clasp of our hands and the fruit of our hearts. So this was the reality, and that is why, and this is an extremely important, point that we have to emphasize here, because I have been open enough to talking to people who are not like me. People that may be described as secular Muslims, for instance. I have been willing to talk to them, to hear their concerns and their trepidations and their reluctance about the concept of Khilafa, their fear from this concept, their basically paranoia about this concept, because they have traumatized memories, particularly the people who were under the Khilafah, the people who are a little bit more on the intellectual side, and they do read the history and they are a little bit more familiar. So whatever it is, and I have considered myself always to be one of the people who want for Islam to have its rightful place in the public's space or the public's sphere. Whatever we present to them, it brings about, like bad memories, nightmares for them, because many of our khulafa were bloodthirsty lunatics, many of them. And that I have never shied away from saying this, and I will never stop, that many of them were bloodthirsty lunatics. And they used the Ummah as a fodder for basically their pursuit of power and their pursuit of consolidation of power and their pursuit of tyrannical power and their pursuit of basically acting as the Khalifa of Allah, as basically divine agents on earth, or this is how they thought of themselves.
This leads us to the very awkward reality. I've said this so many times in my lectures, that our history is human, our religion is divine. And one of the biggest, in my humble opinion, impediments to this discourse, and again, we're having a very frank conversation. So you said something that many of our khulafa were bloodthirsty lunatics. I want to emphasize here that unfortunately what we have is almost a high school level understanding of Islamic history amongst people that are actually not at high school level. And they have a very romanticized notion of the past. And they're fed either half myths or complete tropes that have no legitimacy to them. And they form an image of the past that is closer to a fantasy than it is to reality. And there are so many examples. I mean, I want to give a library chat. I have a series called Library Chats. I want to give a library chat where I literally go over the top 5 or 10 quotations from which we form this collective romantic memory. The famous story of Wa Mu'tasima, for example, right? I mean, it's complete, found 500 years later. There's no asl to it. I'm not saying it never happened, but for sure we don't know what happened. It's just a complete type of fairy tale-esque type of story. Or the notion that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz eliminated poverty in his entire Khilafah. I mean, how can any person actually believe that amongst 30 million people there is not a single faqir? This is a misunderstanding of a report found of a very specific issue. I don't want to go there. It's a deconstruction. My point is that when you are fed these simplistic tropes, right, that the Khilafah was this grandiose affair where a single lady who was harmed, the Khalifa himself would rally the troops to save her on the other side of the land. That, you know, there was not a single poor person. Ya akhi, there were fuqara in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, and you think that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is going to eliminate poverty. When you have this...
There was Amil Majah in the time of his grandfather.
Of course, exactly. I mean, it's just, I mean, to then assume that there's this utopia out there, in my humble opinion, and this needs to be said, we've lived through the 9/11 crisis, we lived through the Qaeda and ISIS crisis, now we're living through another mini crisis in this regard. Why are so many people attracted to this unrealistic, idealistic, romanticized notion? One of the main reasons is that they have been taught a version of events that is divorced from reality. And they have this perception of the past that is simply not true. And hence, when you have radical groups or even fundamentalist groups that are not violent propagating views that are unrealistic, right? So many people jump onto this proverbial bandwagon because they're wanting this elusive myth of a utopia that has never existed. And when you preach to them this reality, they push back because it's a fairy tale they've been taught their whole lives. And you literally deprive them of something that they've been yearning for so long. And you said it so bluntly. So many of our leaders in the past were not righteous people. Dare I say, and this is again very harsh to say, perhaps that is almost the default, that the people in charge were not worthy to be in charge. And what things that happened under them, and I said this so many times, that the reason why the Khulafa Rashidun are the atypical exception is because they were the exception, you know, to the default of what happened after them. So when people understand this reality, it changes their perception, hopefully, and they become a little bit more mature. But to get back now, so let's fast forward now. We're talking about past and theory. Let's get to modernity. Let's get to our current state of affairs, where we are divided into 57 nation states, where every single country in the Muslim world, has its own political authority, where some of them are genuinely, in terms of civil order, doing relatively well, even GDP-wise, and others amongst them are not doing so well. What now do we do as a Muslim within these Muslim majority? Let's begin with them. Muslim majority lands. You talked about Muslim unity. You talked about you talked about working towards some type of ummah type of notion. But then let's get back to political order. What is the role of the Muslim in a Muslim majority land to bring about a political system of laws in conformity with the Sharia?
Yeah, let's talk about this because it is important. But when it comes to the history, as you said, as you indicated, that's a major problem. I think that people need to learn a little bit more about the history, particularly if you will be if you will be like an activist or a preacher, or you'll put yourself in a place where you actually should learn a little bit more before you assume that position or that place. And we do not want to basically also shake people's confidence in their history or in their ummah. We want to be fair, we want to be just, but we don't want to basically sweep anything under the rug and pretend something that, or present to people something that is completely unreal, completely divorced from reality, or completely unfactual. So our history has, what we need to say is multiple things when it comes to our history and our recollection of our history. One thing is we should compare ourselves, we should compare those khilafas to their times, not to our time, because it would be unfair also that presentism, like people in Europe were not having basically liberal democracies in the Middle Ages. So we should compare them to their times, and they had actually adapted to their times. They were more about their times than they were about the Islamic ideals. So the Umayyads and the wickedness that was practiced by them. Well, if you believe in the Prophet saying mulk ad or mulk adud, it's oppressive kingship. The Prophet ﷺ in a hadith said, Al-Khilafatu fi ummati thalathun thumma mulkun ba'da dhalik. This is the hadith of Safina. Khilafah in my ummah will be only for 30 years, and thereafter it will be kingship. Thumma mulkun ba'da dhalik. And kingship this has like negative connotations. Negative connotations. So he's saying that it will only be 30 years, and this was clearly what it was. So the narrator of the hadith said, "Amsik alayka khilafat Abi Bakr."
The narrator himself, the Safina himself did,
So then some of our righteous predecessors used to dislike calling anyone Khalifa after Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhu. So their cutoff is Al-Hasan ibn Ali radiallahu anhu. This was our last Khalifa.
And here we are romanticizing every single one of them.
Thereafter were kings. And the majority of Ahl Sunnah, as Al-Baghawi says, they don't mind calling them Khalifa, but in the linguistic sense, a successor in the linguistic sense. So we have to compare them to their times because they belong to their times more than their style of governance belonged to the Islamic ideals. The second thing that we have to also recognize is that their violence, their wickedness is not intrinsic to the concept of Khilafah. So we have to also clear the concept of Khilafah as in, simply political expression of Muslim unity or the actualization of Muslim unity in the political sphere. Their violence and their wickedness is really not intrinsic to this concept. This concept can be worked towards without basically bringing back those authoritarian regimes. And we have to make this clear to the rest of the Muslims. The Muslims outside of our echo chambers, because oftentimes we talk as if we were talking to this group or that group, but the vast majority of Muslims, the 95%, outside of our echo chambers, we need to comfort them. We need to tell them that we need to put things in perspective for them and tell them we want them to be proud of their history. We want them to be proud of the accomplishment of our nation, as a people,
as a civilization,
the accomplishment of the civilization, the accomplishment, the Sharia being the backbone of this, the Islamic law, Islamic rule being the backbone that protected us, that kept like a thriving civilization, kept us from chaos, kept us from perpetual strife, kept us from backwardness, and pushed us forward and caused progress and development and so on. The Sharia, not the Khilafah, was the backbone of this. The community, not the Khalifa, was basically the driving force of this. And we wanted people to be proud and people to have confidence in their history. And we wanted to assure them that we're not calling for the return of such oppressive regimes. We would be at the forefront of opposing a return to such oppressive regimes. And when we talk about the Khilafah, when we talk about political realization of Muslim unity or things of that nature, we're talking about a completely different concept. We're talking about a new iteration that is suitable for the times and that would basically be committed to the Islamic ideals of shura, adl, ikha, musawa, and if you say that this sounds like the slogan of the French Revolution, adl and ikha and musawa, but these are Islamic ideals.
Yes.
These are Islamic ideals. No one can argue about this. No one can argue about these concepts being Islamic. So now, moving forward to like a modern conceptualization of al-Khilafa. As I said, when I was growing up, I am indebted to Shaykh Abil Hassan al-Nadwi in terms of tempering my sort of zeal for the political discourse or the my prioritization of the political discourse within the Islamic discourse, within the larger Islamic discourse. And I'm also indebted to, people like Abdul Razak al-Sanhuri, who had a book called Fiqh al-Khilafa wa Tatawwur, Fiqh al-Khilafati wa Tatawwuriha, or you could say wa Tatawwuruha as well, it could work. So the Fiqh of Khilafa and its development or its evolution, Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Sanhuri, rahmahullah. He was not a sheikh, he was a legal scholar, or an Egyptian legal scholar. But he was very sympathetic to the idea of Khilafa. And he wanted to figure out sort of different conceptualizations, modern conceptualizations of al-Khilafa in the form of, like his idea would be the OIC basically being effective in bringing about unity, coordination, cooperation, integration, confederation of Muslim states. Yeah. So he was very adamant that it has to be decentralized. This idea that people in Bangladesh and people in Jakarta and Morocco, Casablanca, Timbuktu, and Bosnia can be ruled by one central government someplace in Baghdad or in Damascus. He figured that that's untenable. It's just not going to work. It will not work. You can't even cross the borders from between Morocco and Algeria. The borders are closed since 1994. Since 1994, the borders are closed between Morocco and Algeria. So yes, that is not what we're looking forward to. But again, at the same time, we have to recognize that these are different communities with different histories, different challenges, different priorities, different cultures, different many, many, many things. So it has to be decentralized. And then we have to basically realize that unity among ourselves without having a compulsive, oppressive central government somewhere that is basically ruling over the entire Muslim world. So could the OIC be developed to where it becomes really effective in bringing about some of these objectives, some of these goals? Yes, you don't like the OIC because it is basically useless. You think it is useless. That's fine. Call it something else. But it is that idea of confederation of willing communities,
each one maintains its individual. I mentioned something similar in my
and then the idea of blocks also. The gunpowder empires, three gunpowder empires: the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. These are the three gunpowder empires. Didn't they have some great accomplishments? Yes, because they were bigger blocks, more powerful. It was not one Khilafa. It was not, a singular, and certainly the Safavids, they were Shia, and then they were flanked by two Sunni empires from the right and left. But then, as bigger blocks, more powerful blocks, they were able to achieve a lot. So that conceptualization, will help us have different priorities. I don't have any problem with people who aspire to, look forward to, dream of Muslim unity, Muslim integration, Muslim cooperation, How could I? How could anyone who's, a
Problem
Muslim
exactly is good.
have a problem with this? So the problem that I have is people who exaggerate the priority of this, people who have a rigid understanding of what it means, people who have an unrealistic understanding of the different strategies that we can take towards achieving this goal, and people who have like an incessant fixation on it. And people who, that goes back to the issue of priorities. People who consider the ibadat that we have as basically a means to establishing the governance of God. So they have this as like an ultimate priority, which is really unfair to Islam. Allah says, الَّذِينَ مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ. Those that who, if we establish them on earth, or if we give them establish their authority on earth, they will أقاموا الصلاة. And the other ayah, Allah said, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُم فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَا اسْتَخْلَفَ الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِهِمْ وَلَيُمَكِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ دِينَهُمْ الَّذِي ارْتَضَىٰ لَهُمْ وَلَيُبَدِّلَنَّهُم مِن بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِمْ أَمْنًا يَعْبُدُونَنِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this ayah says it all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Allah promised those of you who had faith and were righteous, that He will give them authority in the land. استخلفنهم, give them authority in the land. So it's a product of faith and righteousness. So it is a product, as Shaykh Abul Hassan, emphasizes it, a product of faith and righteousness. And eventually you'll have authority in the land. Allah will establish your deen for you. Allah will substitute security for the fear that you were afflicted by. Then the ultimate goal after this is يَعْبُدُونِنِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا, to worship me and ascribe no partners to me. So this is the beginning and the end. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ يَعْبُدُونَ لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا. In the middle, the product of their iman and amal salih will be istikhlaf, will be...
Sheikh, let me pause you here for these ayat. Now, I'm going to say something that I don't necessarily agree with for the disclaimer, but this is something that certain movements, I don't like mentioning, there's certain movements that are, so there's a whole spectrum of movements like when it comes to Islamic politics and establishing it. There are some that are on the very soft anti-Khilafa, and there are those that are very pro-Khilafa. Some of these movements that are on the very not too enthused about the Khilafa, they're more into the tarbiyah, or they're more into like da'wah and tabligh, whatever it might be. Some of these movements, their leaders have said, and I've heard this myself because I was, we all grew up in the same areas and whatnot, and listening to their leaders have said that this whole notion of a Khilafa, it has never been commanded explicitly in the Quran. And rather there seems to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifting it when we deserve it. And another famous one of them said, we should not be working towards a Khilafah. Establish a Khilafah in your hearts and Allah will establish it in the land. So multiple strands of modern Muslim movements, and there is piety and iman and knowledge and taqwa in them. So even though I personally don't agree with those strands, but multiple strands have this notion of extreme quietism and apolitical activism. And they interpret the Quran and Sunnah, obviously, and Seerah. They interpret this to indicate that it is not a part of our Sharia to actively challenge the rulers and get involved in the dirty business of politics, as one of them said. Rather, what we should do is strive to be pure spiritually and amongst our own, circle of influence. And when that happens, Allah will gift us. And they read this in the Quran and the Seerah. الَّذِينَ إِن مَكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, as you know. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنكُمْ لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ. So these movements argue that in fact we should not be actively working towards this type of political unity, primarily because they say it's going to backlash. And so what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's important. That's why I repeated the name of Shaykh Abul Hassan Nadwi several times, because he was not basically extreme to the right or the left.
without a doubt متوسط.
Yeah,
علام.
like so he represents me in that particular area. And I have referred to his book because I think that you would benefit more reading his book than listening to my speech here. And I don't agree with this. People who know me know that I am inclined towards synthesis. It does not mean that synthesis is always right, because there is no synthesis between Tawheed and Shirk. I understand this, and I understand all the rebuttals, and I understand that everything we said today can be refuted, and you could write articles about it, and you could refute it in podcasts also, and stuff like that. I'm completely aware of this, but I have been always inclined towards synthesis. And I do see where I have been always open to and exposed to different thinking group or styles of thinking and approaches to the deen and approaches to this particular issue. I have never deprived myself of the opportunity to listen to different groups and different people attentively and without bias or prejudice. And I do see where they're coming from, because sometimes every action has every action has an sort of an opposite reaction, and sometimes the exaggeration in one direction brings about exaggeration in another direction. People think that when they do this, things balance out. But I think that it would be best for all of us to congregate a little bit closer to the middle, closer to the al-wasat, which would be important. If the Khilafah, if Muslim unity, and if all expressions of Muslim unity, and the political sphere is one of those spheres, if all expressions of Muslim unity are desirable, we have to basically ask ourselves the question: is this something desirable or not desirable? Like Allah wants us to be one ummah.
I don't think anybody would argue that it is not desirable.
Okay, so if it is desirable, why should we not be working towards it? Why should we not why should we not keep the dream alive? Why should we not keep the dream alive?
جيد. They would say, Sheikh.
I sat down with one sheikh that people actually accuse of being anti-Khilafa. Like a very prominent and a very great sheikh, a very traditionalist, who people accuse of being anti-Khilafa. And I spoke with him, about keeping the dream alive and different conceptualizations, modern conceptualization of Khilafa. And he was completely open to this. So sometimes when people say this sheikh is anti-Khilafa or
it comes across with their language, Sheikh.
It's an accusation that is basically based on the sheikh's resentment of overfixation or exaggeration or unrealistic expectations. So he may sometimes say something that would mean to his adversaries that he's anti-Khilafa, but no, no one is arguing that it would not be a good idea for Muslims to actualize their unity in all spheres, economical, political, certainly most importantly, and that would be the priority, the loyalty to an allegiance to the believers. It's one religious community, it's one faith community. So that social unity should precede all other forms of unity. But then if we agree that there's something desirable, just like everything that is desirable, work for it. You don't say that, if you're thirsty, you don't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring me water. You just
you work for it, yes. So to speak on their behalf, and again, for the record, this is not my view, because my view is very clear in the khatir. I believe it is generic fard kifaya, but it's just not on the top, 10 or 20 things in my own list of priorities. But to speak on their behalf, Sheikh, and I'm going to mention a name here because I interviewed him, and that interview did cause a backlash against him. Dr. Akram Nadwi, our respected elder and senior, I interviewed him, I think, a year and a half ago. And I asked a similar question about, Khilafa and working towards it and whatnot. And it came across to many of the viewers that he was extremely dismissive of the notion. And he said the best mechanism in our times for the Muslim to flourish is actually secularism, where the religion is not enforced. And he said, look around you. You know, the most active Muslims and the most, best organizations are in Western lands that allow this freedom to do that. And look back home and you see the repression and oppression going on here. And so he actually, seemed to discourage that. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit, not necessarily on his behalf to defend it, because he can do that himself. But to be clear here, and I know the Shaykh very well, it's not as if any of them are anti-Khilafa. It is that in their view, this notion of where we are to how to get to this ideal is not a possibility. The journey is not going to happen. And our attempts to undertake the journey in their minds are going to backlash on us, right? To the point of it not being conducive to our flourishing and our welfare. And so from their perspective, and this is other senior ulama, the famous one, one of the leaders of the tasfiyah tarbiyah type of movement, the leader of the tasfiyah, like, don't even worry about the khilafah, establish it in your heart. Look at his own history. The guy was, with utmost love and respect, we all love him. He was jailed 3 times. He was tortured in jail. He had to constantly monitor repressive regimes in his own lifetime. So to have that type of psychological reality where you have lived a very difficult life and you simply want to practice your faith and preach and teach, it's understandable they develop a type of quietism and pacifism in this regard, in which it's not that they are rejecting Allah's shariah. A'udhu billah, a'udhu billah. It is rather they are seeing that the way to get from point A to point B is fraught with not just dangers, but death. You're not going to get there. And you will end up harming the ummah. And so, from their perspective, because their priorities are the worship of Allah and tasfiyah and tarbiyah or da'wah and tabligh, whatever it might be, from their priorities, it doesn't make sense to jeopardize that which is more important for that which is lesser important. Would you disagree with my analysis of their world?
No, and since you mentioned the name of the Shaykh, I didn't want to mention the name of the Shaykh, but it is Shaykh Akram Nadwi that I sat down with, and I told them, why can't we keep al-Khilafa as a illa gha'iyya, so like a final
exactly, and I wanted to defend that he's not anti-Khilafa.
So this sort of illa gha'iyya would be not the effective cause of the Renaissance, not sufficient cause, not necessary cause, but basically like a final cause, like an ultimate goal or ideal that will attract us, that will motivate us, energize us, or pull us towards that end goal of sort of more Muslim unity and this actualization in different spheres, including the political sphere. And the Shaykh was completely open to this idea.
Yes. No Shaykh is going to deny. Whatsoever. If you were to offer us Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu right here, who's going to say no to that? Yeah. But the issue comes where we are now to how to get there, right?
Yes. So basically, and I don't always agree with Erdogan, and I have my own sort of reservations about things that he does and things that he says and things that he did in the past. But look at his model. I mean, I look at, where Turkey was when he assumed leadership and where Turkey is now. Do you see improvement? Do you see improvement on the religious front? Do you see improvement on the economical front? Do you see improvement on the political front? Yes, I understand that people are very upset with Turkey now because of letting down the people in Gaza. And I'm not...
it's not a defense,
This is not, so I'm not... But at the end of the day, just point A and point B, where Turkey was when he assumed leadership, where Turkey is now. Do you see improvement? Do you see similar improvement in other places? I don't. Malaysia had some degree of improvement under Mahathir, a great deal of improvement. I pray for their success. I pray for their progress. But I have not seen anything in modern times
that comes close
to this Erdoganite.
Exactly. And when you say this, model. The idealists always point out that long list of negatives, which are true. and I
Well,
can't
true.
defend that.
Yes.
But compare that to others out there is all that we're saying.
Exactly. So I think that's what Sheikh Akram Nadwi is trying to say is like, make this a model towards like improvement, the betterment of the Muslim condition in different countries, like, and start at the local level. It has to be local. You'll have to prioritize, the local community, because how do you get to al-Khilafah? How do you get there? You want people that are willing. What you're trying to do is like this idea of marching the troops is not going to work. That this idea of basically shaming people into it is not going to work. Like you have countries that have per capita GDP of $130,000. You have countries that have per capita GDP of $1,500. How do you convince those people who have a per capita GDP of $130,000 to share their money with those who have a per capita GDP of $1,500? Like, how do you convince Qatar to come into a union with Egypt, for instance, and share their money with the 100 million people in Egypt?
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
So, like, you can't march the troops, you can't shame them into it. So it has to be like an alliance of the willing, like an alliance of willing communities, willing nations that want to basically benefit from unity, from cooperation, coordination, integration. Why don't we start at the local level? Why don't we figure out our problems within each one of those countries? Why can't we look towards righteous governance in the individual countries? And people keep on saying that this type of pragmatic discourse has failed to capture the imagination of the youth, has failed basically to make any dent in reality or capture the imagination of the youth, or to have like a bold vision. And I do have great respect for those people, but sometimes there are two concepts here that get conflated. The idea of thinking outside the box is a great idea. You do need to think outside the box, but what box are we talking about? There has to be common sense. There has to be like an objective reality. So sometimes I feel that some of our great, first and second generation Muslims in the West are actually captive of postmodernist relativism. And this idea of thinking outside the box is basically a product of postmodernist relativism more than it is like a bold vision or...
Can you elaborate on that, Sheikh? Okay, by an example, what do you mean?
Thinking outside the box is basically presenting clearly unrealistic ideas or clearly unrealistic solutions, and considering the opposition to be too unable to have sort of greater vision or bolder vision, captive to their timidity, captive to their intellectual deficiency. So when it comes to the Khilafah, and when it comes to proposing, ideas that would sound to the rest of the people unrealistic, unfeasible.
So, to be clear then, one of the examples in your mind are those movements that are demanding an immediate political entity without going through requisite steps? Is that one of
Yeah,
them?
yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah, just so that would be clear.
Yeah. So basically,
Okay, so Sheikh, let's get now a bit more again specific now. And again, excuse me for my bluntness, but this needs to be, we need to speak very specifically about these realities. We're well aware that the Khilafah, the Ottoman Caliphate, despite its ups and downs of our history, at least we had something, but the Ottoman Caliphate came to an end literally 100 years ago, a month ago. And since that point in time, multiple thinkers, multiple movements, multiple strands have attempted to re-engage the ummah in different ways. And by the way, just coincidentally, I'm literally, before you came, I was reading this book. I'm reading the finishing up by Shaykh Rashid Rida, Al-Khilafa wal Imamat al-Uzma, which is a series of articles in Al-Manar. That
he was one of the very active people.
Yes. And so he began writing, there's like, 15 articles? So the first article was written when the Khilafah was on its downfall. And the last article is written and the Khilafah is gone. And so it's 100 years ago, literally. So I'm just reading this now to get over it. It's just, I personally resonate a lot with Imam Shaykh Rashid Rida in many aspects, including this one. So after the collapse of the Ottoman Khilafah, we saw a myriad of thinkers and movements attempt to renegotiate the ummah. And factually speaking, I'm not taking a side here, I'm simply analyzing the bird's eye view. All of these movements stopped making the Khilafah and the reemergence of the Khilafah at the very top of the list, except for one primary movement. So you had an entire, and since they passed on, we can mention some names here. You mentioned Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi, even the Islamist parties like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Jamaat Islami realized that maybe the Khilafah is a bit too long-term. Let's just get with our own countries and try to Islamify them. Right? And of course, then you had the Tasfi and Tarbiyah, the Salafi movements, the Sufi movements, the establishment, the traditionalists. You had all of these movements. None of them made their primary agenda, the immediate agenda, the constant agenda, the establishment of the Khilafah. Some of them made it once in a while, and some of them took a very, it looks anti-Khilafah stance, but as we explained, it's that they thought that it's not feasible, not that they didn't want it, right? Only one movement, and we know which one it is, the followers of respected Shaykh Taqiyuddin Nabhani, we respect and ask Allah to bless and reward him. Only one movement really made this the front and center, the dandana, the primary issue here, right? What are your thoughts on why this is the case? That all of these other movements did not make it to the level that, this movement did. And you yourself, you already said you align towards Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi. Who else besides al-Nadwi would you find your heart aligning to in this entire myriad of movements here? And I know it's a personal question, but I mean, just
Rashid Rida, of course, is one of them. But I have written a post last year about reviving the legacy of Rashid Rida, because it seems, a lot of people have their reservations against Shaykh Rashid Rida because of sectarian reasons and because of other reasons.
And myths and lies. Wallahi, so much lies
Yes,
against him.
there are so many lies.
Slanders,
Yes.
yeah.
But he was a great scholar, and you don't have to agree with every scholar, with any scholar. You can't even agree with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq on everything. There is only one person that you have to agree with on everything. Yeah. But anyway, so what I wanted to say is that people. Particularly Shaykh Taqiyuddin Nabhani, and these were turbulent times, and people had every right to be sad about the cessation of the Khilafah. But people also need to be truthful, honest with themselves, realistic. This idea, for instance, that you hear sometimes that had we had a Khilafah, what is happening to the people in Gaza now would have never happened. No, it's untrue. It's untrue. The Khilafah is neither a sufficient or a necessary cause for Muslim power, for Muslim dignity, for if you have big blocks like, without them being the Khalifas. By the way, the Ottomans, for a very good portion of the beginning of their dynasty, they were not calling themselves Khalifa. They even were calling Caesar before Khalifa.
A lot of people don't know this. It's very politically incorrect to say. When they conquered Constantinople, they wanted to actually preserve and resume the Roman
Empire.
And people don't want to say this, but
anyway,
it's a reality.
Fine.
Yeah,
it's fine. Yeah. But if we have like 3 big blocks, like those blocks, you know, you could do a lot with three big blocks like this. You could do a lot with, you know, regional powers, different regional powers that coordinate among themselves. That because we repeat Muslim unity. We are one ummah, and every expression of that unity is desirable, and we should be working towards every expression of that unity. But how powerful you are matters. If Egypt were as powerful as Great Britain, Great Britain is not much bigger than Egypt, size-wise, population-wise. But even if Egypt were as powerful as Great Britain, would you have expected different sort of behavior from Egypt during this crisis? Of course. Of course. ولو أن قومي أنطقتني رماحهم نطقت ولكن الرماح أجرتي. Had the spears of my people given me the power to speak, I would have spoken. But the spears of my people held me back because of the weakness of my people. So and this idea that had we had a Khilafah, this would have never happened. Well, we had the Khilafah, and 90% of Muslim countries were under occupation. Were colonized while we had the Khilafah. So why are we not being honest? Like, why can't we be honest? Why can't we say that this is desirable? This is a good end goal. This should motivate us, energize us, make us work together to bring about more Muslim loyalty, allegiance, unity, cooperation, coordination, integration, and all of that stuff, but place it where it belongs in the list of priorities.
Where would you place it, Sheikh? Where would you place it roughly? In the top 5, in the top, or the next 30, or the bottom 10 out of 100, like roughly?
I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be inaccurate, but I would say that, like, for the individual Muslim in a Muslim majority country, this would not be a priority for him at this time. Basically, the Islamic way of life, and as I said, we have to shift the focus to the Sharia. And as al-Sanhuri, rahimahullah, said, it is also reform has to be an essential ingredient in this. So
by reform, you mean Islah al-Nafs or what?
No, reform of legal reform.
Okay.
The adaptability of the Sharia to current realities. Because that has to be, in order for the Sharia's relevance and applicability, continued applicability, there has to be reform. In order for it to survive and to continue to be relevant and to continue to be applicable, it has to be reform. And as we said, the divine address is not changing, but the realities are changing. And then those realities will fit under different principles as they change.
So you're calling for a reform in?
Legal reform, like tajdeed.
Of how? Like, again, specific, Sheikh, because this is all slogans. Like, give me like an example of what you're trying to bring about here.
Okay, so when I give you like, so if you say that the Sharia, for instance, says that the longest duration of pregnancy is 4 years or 2 years or 7 years, no one will believe that. If you say, like,
so there are many opinions, Sheikh, that are mentioned in the books of fiqh that
war. The word war. Should the default in a relationship be war or peace? The war itself, are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about, a couple of thousand people sparring in a battlefield?
We're talking about nuclear and chemical weapons. Yeah.
So should this make a difference? Should this make the war even a remoter last resort? For us,
so you're calling for a re-understanding and rethinking through specific juz'iyat of fiqh, specific minutiae. Yeah, of course, this is something I've been saying for many, many years. Obviously, the critics, they lose track of what you're trying to say. The accusation becomes you are a reformer, a reformist. You are making the hadam al-sharia and whatnot.
Absolutely not. The Sharia is the
exactly
objectives of Sharia the principles of Sharia are fixed, but we're talking about the different realities that will fit under different principles. And that's exactly what Imam Shatibi said, that these realities, they don't change the Sharia, but they meet different principles, or they deserve to have different principles applied to them. But the Sharia then will be at the heart of the Islamic way of life. Of course, devotion to God is the utmost priority. No one would argue about this. But when it comes to organizing our Islamic way of life at the local level, the Sharia will be the central pillar. And it is a moderate, in the sense, a true sense of wasati, moderate, not in basically the so-called modernist sense of moderate or wasati. In the true sense of moderate and wasati, tajdeed by qualified scholars, to keep the Sharia relevant, to keep the Sharia applicable, and to organize our communities around the Sharia being the backbone. We start there, and then when we have improved realities at the local level in different countries, those countries would realize the benefit in the importance of and the benefit in coming together. We should not succumb to pressure, by people whether they are adversaries or whether they are just like non-Muslims looking at the concept of al-Khilafa. They have their own sort of conceptualization of the Khilafah, and they're opposed to it. Well, Europe is trying to come together. Europe has tried to come together for decades now, and the sentiment that many Europeans have against the Turkish membership in Europe is based on religious
exactly, the Islamophobia
reasons. Yeah. So why should Muslims not aspire to towards unity? Why should Muslims be denied the right to aspire towards greater unity among themselves? So, but this will have to come after we make some progress at the local level in our countries. We need to have righteous governance, because this righteous governance, if you have representative governance, if you have representative leadership, they will prioritize the benefits of the ummah, or the benefit of the ummah, over their personal benefit. And then in this case, larger unity, bigger blocks, just Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia coming together. They can have Libya as well. We can have Sudan, so it doesn't matter.
Your Egyptian asabiyas. Just kidding.
No. But I'm trying to say you have like bigger blocks that will realize the benefits of coming together, like bigger markets, like economic integration. Who would not realize? But we need to have representative governments that will realize the benefits of coming together, and eventually, working gradually towards greater unity among the ummah.
So, Sheikh, mashallah, we've been speaking for a long time. Let's kind of wind down, but we still have a few topics, but let's wind down, inshallah, in this regard. So, listening to you, you sound very similar to what I myself was saying in my khatira, which again is not relevant to this podcast, but it just happened that I'm giving my talks here. You are, I would say, a soft advocate of a generic unity. You are not constantly obsessing with this notion of khilafa. You understand that it's an aspirational goal, which has a lot of practical impediments that we have to be very cautious of, not just along the way, but even when we get to the end. We don't want a ideal, khilafah to then easily be corrupted into much of what we've seen in the past as well. So in this regard, Sheikh, then, these are for Muslim majority lands. Let's quickly do some easy stuff. Obviously, Muslim minority situations, us here in America, obviously I've said this very publicly and very clearly, it is not something that the Sharia asks of us to do in minority situations, to aspire to a Khilafa or to aspire to political dominance and to overthrow the internal system in a coup d'etat. I've said this very publicly. That's not what the Sharia requires of us. That is political suicide. We are not people of double agendas, that we say something publicly and we practice something privately. Any disagreement with that, or any caveats to add, or anything of this nature?
No, if the U.S. is willing to participate in a Khilafah system, we're okay with that. But of course, we're not going to force, we're not basically going to overthrow the government here and to make the U.S. part of a.
And this is not just double talk. This is
Oh,
not
of
just.
course,
This
no,
is
of
this is
course.
a genuine. This is a genuine
How
shariah
could you
common sense.
realistically expect this? Like, what did the Prophet ﷺ ask the people in Habasha to overthrow the system, even before Najashi converted to Islam? Was he sending them there to overthrow the system, or was he sending them there to find refuge, peace, and justice? That's what he sent them for.
Yes.
And that they continued to live in Habasha for several years after the establishment of Al-Medina, and they have not tried while they were there to bring Al-Habasha under the fold of the Medinan central government.
Jayyid. So then it is not a tactical goal. It might be an aspiration. I want people in this part of the world to embrace Islam, and I want, once they do so, to join the larger ummah. I don't have any issue with that. But it is not a tactical goal that we sit and plan for, make takhdeed for. Okay? Jayyid. So this is, we're in agreement in this regard. Now, another question or point, Shaykh, in this regard is that we have spoken about all these different movements. I think we're both very clearly, we would situate ourselves centrist. Of course, centrist is relative, because those to the left of us think they're centrist.
All the time.
All the time, yeah. But by and large, I feel that our notions of political activism and of Khilafa and of Islamic political unity, I think we're very, very similar, if not exactly on the same point on the spectrum here. But now the question arises, the theological question.
And this was not planned.
This was not planned,
orchestrated. This is the result of our independent examination of the issue.
Exactly. And Shaykh, I mean, no matter how much I love and respect you, I haven't studied under you, even though I wish I could. And of course, you are too. So yet still, our goals and our views are completely in harmony here. Now, Shaykh, here's the aqadi question. And I have my views as well, but I'm going to hear your views. Here's the aqadi question. We've spoken about this entire spectrum of movements, right? I don't mind mentioning now, because we're not going to mention names. You have the general tasawwuf trend around the world, which is, generally speaking, supposed to be apolitical. It is not supposed to be involved in any type of aspirational politics, right? How far they are from ideal is another thing, but generally that is their goal. You have, of course, Jama'at al-Da'wah Tabligh, okay? And you have the mainstream Jordanian Salafism, which became global in the 90s, which is Tasfiyah and Tarbiyah, and established the Khilafah in your heart, and Allah will establish in the land. You have all of these movements, I would say, roughly in a similar ballpark of not doing anything active to establish the Khilafah. Then you have on the exact opposite side, Hizb al-Tahrir and the followers of Taqiyuddin al-Bahani. And I say this factually, not any derogatory term. That is their constant I don't want to use that term. There's their constant bringing up of this notion, number one on the list, and it is as if this is the ultimate priority for them. Then you have the Brotherhood and the Jamaat Islami, and we both have associations with them. For the record, I was born into such a family. My parents were very active in Jamaat and what Maududi's party. So I grew up with that type of activism. So you have that group, and then you have, political Salafism and others in this. So you have an entire spectrum here, Shaykh. The aqadi question is as follows. Where does one draw the line of Islamic orthodoxy in this entire gamut of apolitical versus the Khilafah is awjab al-wajibat, right? Where, in your humble opinion, is the line of Sunni orthodoxy, such that if you go beyond it, you become mubtadi'? And what is the line of kufr, such that you go beyond it, you are a kafir? So this spectrum, I want to hear from you. And I have my views, I'll follow you up. But again, this guide is completely unscripted. I have no clue what this Shaykh is going to say. So let's hear this, and then you can hear my views. We can go back and forth.
Well, this takes us back to the issue of al-Khilafa being a theological issue or a legal issue. Is it like part of the Aqeedah or part of Fiqh, part of law or part of creed? And in all honesty, it will be problematized. What I will say, whatever I may say here, it will be problematized because of certain hadith and because of certain positions of the scholars or even scholarly practice. We have a hadith, for instance, like man mata walaysa fi unuqihi bay'a mata mitatan jahiliyya. Whoever dies without having pledged allegiance to an imam, he will die in a state of jahiliyya. So it gives you, it makes some people think that this may actually be a matter of creed. But is this talking about the Khilafah, or is just simply talking about order versus anarchy? Is it talking about, like shedding the Muslim blood and violating the rights of people and being like not joining civilization, not coming together and creating a community of law and order? I think that this is basically a condemnation of anarchy, a condemnation of rebellion and anarchy. It is not pointing to a single political entity, no matter how desirable that may be. So, but then it will also be problematized by the practice of Muslim scholars who included, in their Aqeedah books, discussions about the Khilafah and discussions about the Imamah. But from a Sunni perspective, I would say that it belongs to law not creed.
Excellent point. So, to reiterate, the establishment of a Khilafah is more of a shari'i, meaning a fiqh issue, than it is an Aqeedah one.
Yes, but why did they include it in Aqeedah books? Because the Khilafah issue, the Imamah issue, to us was the Trinity to Christians, or the nature of God to Christians. We did not disagree over the nature of God, but this ummah split up over the Imamah
from the beginning.
From the very beginning.
Kharigism.
So the different denominations, that was a defining issue for the breakup between the different sects of this ummah. Therefore, it's like when they include al-masah al-jawrabain or masah al-khuffain, wiping over the leather socks in their Aqeedah books, because it is a defining issue, and they want to basically include in the Aqeedah books that which sorts us out from, or separates us, distinguishes us from other sects. But is it really an Aqeedah issue? No, it is not an Aqeedah issue. I don't believe that it is an Aqeedah issue. It's a legal issue that should be has been discussed in the fiqh tradition. The one thing that borders on an Aqeedah issue is the issue of order versus anarchy.
Jayyid. Shaykh, I'm gonna reiterate what I said earlier. It appears to me these ahadith and the concept of them not bearing the Prophet until they had established the law Khilafah. It appears to me you're understanding this more as a system of governance that prevents anarchy. Hence, when those movements come along and say, how can you not prioritize the Khilafah? And you're saying, well, it's not the top priorities, as you have said. I said it's not top 10 and 20. How can you not prioritize when? And then they'll quote you all of these quotations, and they'll quote you the burial of the Prophet. And they had your response, and also my response is, you are mixing apples and oranges. You're using all of these evidences for something that we're not talking about, right? And that is that, of course, after the death of the Prophet, they needed a leader, or else there would be complete chaos and anarchy, right? We have a semblance of, we're not saying we have a khilafah, a'udhu billah, none of these countries are. We're not saying we have ahkam sharia being applied, but we're saying much of the goals that, because of which Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Al-Qurtubi and Al-Shatibi and others said what they said, and the reason why they were so eager to have a leader is that the absence of it leads to complete chaos and civil war. And so we have now infrastructures in place that mitigate that overall notion that is derived from this hadith, even though what is derived from the hadith is not exactly what we're seeing around us, if that makes sense here.
Of course, and so let us work on improving, incremental improvement of the systems that we have. And I understand that people have grievances against the concept of nation state, and they would consider anyone who surrenders to the reality
as
of
a defeatist,
nation state
or worse,
as a defeatist.
But it's not. It's pragmatist. In my opinion.
Well, let's
What's
just
the alternative?
Let's fix them.
Yeah.
Let's fix our nation states. Let's make them better so that they can come together and realize the importance of unity. But that is the first step is to improve to better the reality of different Muslim nations,
Jayyid.
different Muslim
So then
countries.
let me then give you in summary my own understanding. And again, feel free to disagree. Again, I mean, Shaykh, I'm a little bit disappointed that we haven't actually disagreed substantively about anything yet. Our viewers might think we are coordinating
Orchestrating
this. Or it's no orchestration. In my humble opinion, Shaykh, and please feel free to disagree. I want to hear this. In my humble opinion, all of these movements are within orthodoxy. They're not even outside the spectrum of Sunnism, proper technical Sunnism. Those that are apolitical pacifists and are hesitant at political activism, and those that prioritize and want to make it number one, in my humble opinion, just on this one issue, they are all within the mainstream. وَفِي كُلٍّ خَيْرٍ. And none of them, in my humble opinion, is more correct than the other, and this is ikhtilaf jaiz and sa'igh. When would it become bid'ah? It would become bid'ah when you narrow down the spectrum and you claim only your segment is the orthodox way, and those who oppose you are now theologically deviant. By you making them deviants, you have in effect made yourself Ahl al-Bid'ah by prioritizing or by making something which, as I said, I don't mind the movement that prioritizes Khilafah. I don't even think that issue of them makes them misguided. I think they're a bit wrong. I also use the term sometimes naive, and they use it back at me. It's a two-way street here, and I understand that point. That is what it is. But it is not theologically problematic. But it will become theologically problematic when they do not return the same favor back unto us. And they say unto us that you are misguided Islamically because you have not followed our interpretation. This, in my humble opinion, is my understanding of orthodoxy in this regard. Any disagreement in this or any comments in this?
No, I think that I would just rephrase some things. Like you said that none of them is more correct than the other. That would be like an issue that I like a statement that I would rephrase, because you said that you believe that a particular group is wrong. So if they're wrong, then some of these groups are more correct than others.
Correct, not in a
from a theological standpoint, I did already say that this is a legal issue. It may some of the disagreement may stem from theological backgrounds or orientations, where our understanding of qadr and our understanding of human agency and the issue of free will or determinism or some.
No, to reiterate, I'm not saying these movements are all correct in all that they say.
Yeah.
I'm saying because of their stance on this issue, I don't make tabdi' of any of them.
No, yeah, I don't make tabdi' of anybody.
That's what I'm saying.
Where they place al-Khilafa
that's exactly
the list of priorities.
That's my point. This ikhtilaf is ikhtilaf jaiz and sa'igh.
Yes.
That was my point.
Yes.
Okay, so then there is no tabdi' to be done in any of these movements for this one issue. That was my point. So then we're agreement there. And takfir, Shaykh, honestly, I can't see it happening in this regard unless somebody, which goes beyond this issue of khilafah, ينكر أحكام الله عز وجل بصفة عامة. They say, we don't want ahkam of Allah, which I can't imagine a Muslim or aqil or somebody. That's like you're talking about a secularist who doesn't believe in Allah's religion. I can't see takfir coming in our talk of khilafah per se in this regard.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't see that. But like people who deny loyalty to the believers, but nobody denies loyalty to the believers. Even the most apolitical people would say that this loyalty to this.
In fact, Sheikh, I'll even go further and say, the reason why I say this entire spectrum is permissible theologically is the hallmark of Sunnism. That's the whole point in my humble understanding, in my interpretation of this regard. This is al-hadd al-fasil between us and the Khawarij and the Shia, right? They theologized politics, and we don't do that.
Of course, Imam for Shia الإمامة for Shia is a أصل من الأصول. It's,
And
you know,
and and
it's
and
it
for
could
the
be.
Khawarij,
Yeah.
any disagreements became bid'ah and kufr. That's the
Yep.
whole point. Al-Hadd al-Fasil. For us, Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhum, and more than that, all of these war, you can choose your side. You can fight on one side. You don't become Ahl al-Bid'ah. Right? If this is the case from back then, and you had political pacifists, you had quietists, you had people on both sides, you had people doing much more than just verbalizing in this regard. If you don't become a mubtadi' in this entire spectrum, then a priori min babi awla, 1,400 years later, what are you doing? We don't have a khilafah, and you have all of these movements and thinkers and ulama and mufakkirin wanting to figure out what is the best way forward, right? And all of them theoretically love Allah's sharia and want to see an established sharia. It's just a matter of different people have different perceptions of the means and the pros and cons of the means. And so in this regard, choose your strand and be active in that strand, but do not bring in the tabdi' card when it comes to all of these mainstream movements. So again, I think then, so you agree with me that in this issue at least, there is no bid'ah taking place in all of the movements I mentioned, from the apolitical to even, and I disagree with in many ways, but it's not a bid'ah issue, the HT in this regard, right? And the priority of the Brotherhood and the Islamist parties or whatnot, it's not even the Khilafah anymore. The priority is to Islamicize their societies, right? And that is also permissible in this regard. And then you have, again, the Salafis and the Sufis who are just interested in their own versions of Aqeedah and Tasawwuf and whatnot. This is not even a bid'ah in this regard. So, and then in this we're in agreement. So then in reality, the only bid'ah would be if you make this so narrow that disagreement with you becomes a theological unorthodoxy.
And basically, if you have the Khilafat on your sort of list of priorities or higher list of priorities, please recognize that the rest of the groups are helping you. They're not harming you. You know,
I said this as well.
you know,
Exactly, Sheikh. We're saying the same thing. We're not stopping you.
So the Tabligh and Dawah brothers that go out to bring people to the Masjid, they're helping you.
Yep, exactly.
You know, the people who, you know, who have an emphasis, the Salafis who have an emphasis on, you know, the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the, you know, Hadith and so on. They're helping you. They're bringing more people, making more people interested in, you know, the way of the people who have an emphasis on devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the cleansing of the heart. They're helping you. So recognize that this is basically all, you know, I have my own sort of or basically orientations, whether theological, legal, or tazkiyah-wise, but I can see that these people, there are a lot of genuine, sincere people out there that are trying to their best to be better Muslims, and they wish the Ummah well, and they want the best for the Ummah.
And we're all on the same wavelength when it comes to reviving the love of Allah in people's hearts. It's just different ways of doing so. So mashallah, Shaykh, we've spoken a lot. So let me then summarize from my point of view a few minutes, and then inshallah, I'll leave the final word for you. You can summarize khulasa of what you want people to go away with. My summary for the viewers and whatnot is going to echo what I said a month ago. My opinions haven't changed in 1 month, despite all of the pushback and refutations. It hasn't changed because, in my humble opinion, much of it is misunderstanding what I'm saying. And by the way, again, for the record, our conversations were not scripted. I did not know we would end up agreeing on so many points. In fact, maybe even everything. But khulasa, what I said, a few weeks ago, I'm going to reiterate here. In my humble reading of the Quran and Sunnah and looking at the turath of the ulama, including Shaykh Rashid Rida, read his book if you have time to do so. It is clear to me, in my humble opinion, it is an opinion, ijtihad, that there has always been a spectrum of interactions with rulers and with the concept of Khilafah, especially after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And I don't see a theological problem in any of these strands. And fi kullin khair. My personal sympathies are more on the centrist side, i.e., to bring about a change at the local level rather than to think about the global level. And the reason for this is not because, astaghfirullah, anybody opposes the ahkam of Allah, anybody does not want to see a khilafah. The reason is because in my humble reading of history and my own life experiences, attempting to bring about that type of political change is going to harm and backlash you, your friends and family, your movement, and frankly, all pious Muslims, because the people that are opposing you are generally speaking not religious people. So for people to, and this is what our Shaykh Akram said bluntly, is like the only people that talk about the Khilafah are those that are living outside of it. The only people that want to establish some Muslim rule are those living in secular democracies. Because if you were living under those tyrannical regimes, firstly, your perception would be different. And secondly, you wouldn't even be allowed to speak at all in this regard. So in my humble assessment, we need to prioritize that which will get us into Jannah. And that is not in and of itself a khilafah. It is our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our implementation of the sharia in our personal lives, our commitment to our faith and values, and organically, slowly, without causing any bloodshed, without causing any hardship on the people that is unreasonable, we start propagating a larger vision of Muslim unity and seeing what we can accomplish in this regard. Wallahu ta'ala alam. This is in a nutshell my summary. However, anybody who disagrees, I don't view it as a theological deviation. And if somebody says even that is unrealistic, I understand. As our Shaykh Dr. Akram has a slightly different view. And if somebody says, no, we want to only talk about this, I don't have a problem with that as long as they don't have a problem with others not being on their exact same wavelength. So that's my khulasa summary. Shaykh, if you can also summarize in a few minutes your entire, what you want the viewer to go away with, inshallah, and that will be our concluding remarks.
Jazakumullah khairan. Alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I would say that no Muslim in the world, I guess, who's sincere Muslim, who's learned Muslim, would not want to see more Muslim unity, cooperation, coordination, integration, allegiance, loyalty to the believers, and all expressions, all manifestations, all the different types of actualization of this unity are desirable, but we need to have realistic and grounded understanding of what is possible in this regard, and we need to have also strategies that are conducive to this Muslim unity and that will take in consideration the realities that the different Muslim communities live in. Our ultimate goal should always be the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ubudiyya lillah is the ultimate success to actualize ubudiyya lillah. And al-ubudiyya lillah is, as Shaykh Abul Hassan said when he was trying to use Imam Taymiyyah's definition of al-ubudiyya to stress the fact that the political expression of this ubudiyya is one expression. It is not the ultimate expression. It's not the only expression. Al-ubudiyya lillah is tamam al-hubb ma'a tamam al-dhull wal-khudu'. It is basically the ultimate love and adoration mixed with ultimate submission and subjugation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that this should be our ultimate goal, and our work for Muslim unity should be part of the realization of this ultimate goal. That's
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. We had a great time. Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you. May Allah azza wa jal bring about that unity that we aspire to. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us achieve aspirationally that goal that we want. And with this, Jazakumullah khair, dear viewers, inshallah, I hope you can benefit. And also, please, if you do link to a clip or whatnot, make sure you listen to the entire interview and especially the concluding statements that we both made. And with this, until next time, we have another conversation. We do have another conversation planned, inshallah. Until next time, Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا